Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Jeraffemy Talks, here live on twitch.tv/Jeraffemy and being archived after the fact on YouTube. Hope you're doing well this Monday, the 21st of November. This is the, I'll say, first attempt at a new podcast that I want to do where I'm just going to be talking about basically subjects that are on my mind, as it were. And today, perhaps predictably if you know me, is going to be a bit wrestling focused. So I am going to be talking about the AEW Full Gear pay-per-view from this weekend, as well as the New Japan Stardom event Historic Crossover, which took place Sunday morning, UK time. Good day, Kenta Hayabusa. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for tuning in. So, I'm going to sort of get right to this, because I don't know how long I'm going to talk for, as it were, and if you know me, I like to talk. So, let's get straight into things by talking about AEW Full Gear 2022. It was quite the event, wasn't it? So, this took place in Newark, New Jersey, and there were so many questions going into this show. From my perspective, it was just, is this just going to be a really fun show? For want of a better phrasing, is there going to be a big story coming out of it that's going to overshadow the event? I.e., like there was at All Out, like there was at Double or Nothing. There were just things like that were going on. So, I think this was a phenomenal event. I actually managed to watch the entire thing live, which, again, from a UK perspective, if you include the 0-hour pre-show, that began at midnight on Sunday morning, as it were, and the show ended total just before 5 a.m. In the past, I have gone on record as saying that it felt way too... I mean, there was one show that went on nearly 6 hours, and that was way too long. But it was strange. My original thought process was I wanted to watch 0 Hour live because I really wanted to see Eddie Kingston and Jun Akiyama live. And then maybe watch one or two matches, maybe the first hour or so of the pay-per-view, and sort of go from there, as it were. And figure out how I was feeling. And suffice to say, the first two matches on the pay-per-view, that being the cage match and then the trios titles match, there was no way in heck I was going to fall asleep for a while after that, so I was wide awake, to say the least. It was such a good show overall. Did it have, arguably, I'll say some perhaps quibbles in it, minor points? Yeah, totally. But what show doesn't? But overall, I thought this show was fantastic. It's exactly what AEW needed in terms of moving forward, re-establishing a bit of a status quo, and quite frankly, just getting excited for what is next to come in AEW. And Kenta Hayabusa, as you've just said in the Twitch chat here, agreed this was a great show, huge improvement from the last one. Excuse me. Completely agree. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to go over each match somewhat individually, but I'm probably not going to dwell on everything in far too great a depth, again, because I also want to talk about the New Japan Stardom show as well. So, when it comes to 0 Hour, it began with best friends Orange Cassidy and very evil, very mysterious mystery partner, Danhausen, against the Factory. This was, as someone described it to me actually, they said this is kind of like a party match, and it was just a bit of fun, showcased a little bit of wrestling, but overall it was designed to be a fun opener. And that's exactly what this was. Now, when it comes to Danhausen, I love Danhausen. I think Danhausen is such a great, fun character. Admittedly, I am not very familiar with, say, let's call it the lore of Danhausen. I've followed him maybe like the past couple of years or so, but I've never really had a chance to delve back very deep into the lore of Danhausen. So I wasn't actually really aware that there was seemingly a more evil incarnation of Danhausen, which is what this very evil, very mysterious moniker was playing off. I'm looking forward to seeing how that may or may not progress in the coming weeks or months, but the main thing I'm happy to see is that Danhausen is actually wrestling in AEW. There's been like a couple of fun random comedy squash style matches, as it were, but I was just really happy to see Danhausen being able to do some more wrestling. It was really cool to see. Ultimately, I'll just call them the best friends team, if you will, because it's far easier to describe it like that. Ultimately, they got the win. Now, backstage after that, we got a little interview from Renee Paquette talking to Konosuke Takeshita, who, it was announced earlier in the day, has now signed a contract with AEW. Frickin' fantastic. very, very, very happy about this. And you can tell from Takeshita's, from what he was saying, he's genuinely excited to be a part of the roster. Now, it's also come out after the fact as well, he's still signed to DDT as well as AEW, so he'll be going back and forth between the two, but that's just amazing news. Takeshita made such an impression in his original excursion earlier this year. I am so excited to see where this goes. Heck, I'll throw out an idea. Let him challenge for the All-Atlantic Championship, take that from Orange Cassidy, and kind of do what Pac was doing in sort of travelling around the world with the belt. I think that would be a great way and a great advert for AEW as a whole, but also for Takeshita to really add some additional prestige, not only to his name, but to that championship. Next up, the World Title Eliminator Tournament match. It was Ricky Starks defeating Brian Cage in what was pretty much just a brawl around the outside. It was kind of what I was expecting it might be going in some ways. I expected that Ricky Starks was going to win, first of all. But this was just a lot of stuff going on around the place, ultimately leading to Ricky Starks getting the win. Ethan Page was also on commentary, and when it came to which opponent he was going to face, the mentality he was going around is he's just thinking about whether it's going to be Mox or MJF. And even the announcers were going, are you sure you want to overlook both of these guys? Because they're both really great in their own right. The final round is on Dynamite this Wednesday. And obviously now we know it's Ethan Page and Ricky Starks. There's a part of me that thinks there's going to be an element where Ethan Page thinks he's just going to get an easy win because of how much Brian Cage decimated him in the 0 Hour match. So I think that may have a part to play in this as well. Next up, basically, Eddie Kingston, Jun Akiyama. But this actually also started backstage just before it, because Renee Paquette was doing a little backstage interview with Eddie Kingston, and this is a prime example of how to put across the emotion that can be involved in professional wrestling. This is a dream match for Eddie Kingston, literally one of his heroes, and he's getting to go in the ring with them, and he can't finish a sentence as to how he is feeling. He can't put into words how he is feeling about this, and just wanted to get out there and do the match. This is one of the most, I don't want to use this word, but legitimate backstage interviews you will see in pro wrestling in terms of genuine emotion and at a loss for words. This was fantastic, leading to the match itself, which was just great fun. It was really, really good. Eddie Kingston, you could tell, was kind of having the time of his life in there while also trying to put on the best flipping match that he could. There were some wonderful moments. Akiyama got some great moments in there as well. Ultimately, it led to Kingston getting the win, and Kingston was bowing to him, and the two shook hands, both had a massive appreciation for each other. One would assume that Akiyama's probably got a new appreciation for Eddie Kingston, given that this match seemingly all came about because Eddie Kingston just said one day, I really want to face Akiyama, and Akiyama's reaction was effectively, wait, who? What? Really? Oh, cool. And eventually, it was able to happen. It's such a fun story. But after the match, Eddie Kingston got on the mic. There was a couple of minutes left of the pre-show, and he basically just did an improvised promo, which sometimes they are the best. And Eddie Kingston, in many ways, did the perfect final pitch to buy the pay-per-view if people hadn't already. He pretty much just went, buy the damn pay-per-view, it's gonna be great. And sometimes that's all you need to hear from a guy as genuine as Eddie Kingston. So it was such a wonderful little thing, but it went so far just to really set the mood and set the tone of what was about to unfold on the actual pay-per-view itself. Then we move forward to the pay-per-view. We begin with the cage match of Jack Perry against Luchasaurus. Jack Perry ultimately getting the win. This came from a giant elbow drop off the top of the rope that put Luchasaurus through a table, because there have been some things outside the cage as well, because Christian was able to unlock the door but ultimately got carted away. I've seen people online saying, why did there have to be the outside the cage stuff? And you know what? To a degree, I agree with that sentiment, but it did not take away my enjoyment of the match. I thought this was an excellent opener. It showed Jack Perry in a whole new light, I'm half tempted just to start calling him Jungle Jack Perry now, like just remove the boy from the Jungle Boy moniker, or Jungle Lad, or similar, excuse me. So I'll be very interested to see where they do go with him. I'm hoping that this is the end of the whole Christian feud for now. Until Christian's fully healed, I think he should just go away for a while. And then maybe this leads up to a big opportunity for Jungle Boy, where ultimately it's Christian that costs him the match. Then we finally get the big blow-off match between the two. Then Jungle can finally move on, as it were. That's how I think that should go from here. But this was an excellent opener. And in terms of ordering of the show, I thought having the cage match first was actually the right decision. When I actually did a little preview on my YouTube channel, Jeraffemy Talks, I actually talked about this match first. Partly because I thought it might be first on the show, and partly because I just wanted to talk about it first. So I was actually very, very happy that this match was first. So then we go from that match, and we're all hyped up, we're all excited about, right, we're off to a great start. What the heck is going to be next? And then we see the graphic on screen for the Trios title match, and there was almost a collective feeling of, oh my god, really? This is next? I was going into the show saying this was probably going to be match of the night. For me, this was match of the night, if not a very strong contender between this and the World Women's title match, because that match was also so damn good. But this match was utter bonkers. It was so damn good. The whole thing about the Elite being back. And there's been this feeling since everything that happened at All Out, where there really was just a big void by 4 of the top stars of the company just being gone, almost without warning, after this triumphant return. At that point, of Kenny's just triumphant return as well. But there was this feeling that what are they going to do? Like these pardoning the term, but these 4 elite members of the roster are now just gone in an instant. What's going to happen? And having these 3 back, it just added an element of, yes, this is it. We're back now. This is kind of an all is right with the world type thing. And in a perfect world, I'd love everyone involved in that brawl to be back, but it's clearly not going to happen. So just got to pick up pieces, move on with that. And if anything, the crowd during this match told an interesting story, nonetheless from the match itself and the competitors. Because when the crowd started chanting FCM Punk, that was a statement right there. That was a statement of everyone in that building's feelings regarding the matter, whether who was right or wrong ultimately in terms of the scenario. I mean, we've all heard the stories that have come out about it. We can only go by those reports itself. We're probably never going to know the actual truth behind what exactly happened. But when push comes to shove, elements of both sides were probably right and wrong in terms of what happened. But when it comes to the Elite, yeah, I'm kind of siding more with them on the matter, much as I love CM Punk. It's got to be said. And you could tell the Elite were so up for this. Kenny Omega as well. He was a different level above. This was like Kenny Omega. He was just on a whole other level compared to what we saw a few months ago. Probably because he's had nearly a year to basically recover from the multitude of injuries he's had now. Sans doing a few of those matches. But this match was utterly incredible. I loved all of it. And what it all came down to, and this wasn't played up on Dynamite during the title defense that Death Triangle did against AR Fox and Top Flight, was the whole thing regarding using the hammer to cheat to win. This came into play in this match. Going in, my expectation was the Elite was going to win because Pac was going to tell someone to use the hammer, and then ultimately they didn't, and Pac gets annoyed with them, and then that's what splits the Death Triangle. Now, not all of that is incorrect, as in the hammer would be involved. That's the only part of my prediction that was correct in this. Because what actually happened was Pac gave Phoenix the hammer. We'd had all this ridiculous action going on. And then this led to Kenny setting up the one-winged angel with Phoenix on his shoulders, but he's holding the hammer. And just almost out of a moment of just... It was almost like instantaneous desperation without actually thinking. He clocks Kenny in the head with the hammer. That ultimately leads to Phoenix getting the win. And immediately afterwards, he was almost distraught that he had cheated to won. And that he had cheated to win, sorry. And you could tell it's such a clever little thing that they did. It's so clever. And it was such a damn good match. What an advert for the trios, just for the trios titles. Holy cow. And now it's going to be the question of what next for Phoenix? Is he going to turn more to the dark side? Are we going to get almost like a Dark Phoenix in many ways, kind of using an X-Men moniker there? Or is this actually going to lead to the end of Death Triangle? Because later in the night, we then found out that apparently now a best of 7 series is going to happen between these two teams. And this match was the first one. They've kind of almost retconned it to be the first match in the series, where it also sounds like, based on reporting after the fact, that the winner of the best of 7 series will be the Trios champions. If we're going to potentially get this for 6 more weeks of television, yes, I am all about this. Fantastic. Absolutely love this. What an amazing start to the pay-per-view. And your attention then started thinking of who on earth can follow this? Who has got to follow this? That distinction was put on the TBS title match with Jade Cargill defeating Nyla Rose. Or sorry, I should say Chitara Jade Cargill defeating Nyla Rose, because Jade Cargill coming out just basically coming out as Chitara from Thundercats. So damn good. Amazing stuff. But it was a different dynamic in this match, in that it was Nyla very much playing the heel role, and Jade having to almost be the underdog in the match. And she got some damn good moves on Nyla as well. Nyla threw some incredible moves on Jade, but Jade ultimately got the win in this match. And going in, I said I expected Jade to win because I feel that Willow Nightingale is going to dethrone Jade ultimately. I've still got that mentality about it, but if Nyla had won here, I wouldn't have had a problem with it because Nyla Rose is awesome. Next up, we had the ROH World Championship 4-way match as Claudio Castagnoli, Bryan Danielson, and Sammy Guevara lost to Chris Jericho. This was excellent once again. This was so damn good. The stories in the match going in were Danielson and Claudio more than happy to fight each other in the spirit of competition. Jericho was expecting Sammy to help him win, but Sammy kind of got a clock in the face from a lion's salt and then ultimately stopped Jericho from getting the win, leading those two to fight with each other. And that was a wonderful moment where it legitimately looked like Sammy might win the title, and then when he didn't, you're kind of like, of course he won't. But it was a wonderful dynamic in that. There were so many great moments, but it ultimately led to Claudio having Sammy in a giant swing. And then Jericho sort of comes flying in away from a corner to try and do the Judas effect on Claudio. But he kind of, in essence, like, just stopped the giant swing, but clocked Sammy. And then got up, hit the Judas effect on Claudio, and then got the win. This made complete sense. And the way they did it was so damn good. I loved it. I loved it so much. I sound like a broken record, but it's just a genuine fact. And after the fact as well, a bit later, we got a backstage promo from Jericho where he effectively just said, no, you know what? I welcomed the competition from Sammy. I had a feeling this might happen, so you know what? For the sake of the match, good competition. And then we found out Jericho was defending the title against Tomohiro Ishii from New Japan Pro Wrestling on Dynamite on Wednesday. And that Jericho used to see him back in his days of wrestling for WAR in Japan when effectively Ishii was like a protege, like fetching him coffee and stuff. So there's a little bit of history here. Looking forward to seeing this. It should be good fun. Next up, Saraya makes her in-ring return against Britt Baker. This was a solid match. This was all things considered, I think this match did far more than I expected it to. I perhaps didn't expect it to just be as in-depth as it was, because no one really knew how Saraya was, quite frankly. And there was also Zack Zodiac in the crowd, cheering on for Saraya, who admittedly, the first few times he was on camera, he kept shouting for Saraya, and then notably you suddenly heard him say, Saraya! Almost like someone told him, can you just make sure that you say the name correctly, please? We'd really appreciate it. So we got a little bit of a play-up of the whole, how's her neck doing and such, but ultimately, it led to Saraya getting the win. I think she hit, it was sort of like her like almost packaged DDT in a way. I'm not sure what she's calling it. I've heard online that it's called the nightcap. is what it's being called. But the other big dynamic about this match was it was just one-on-one. That's what it was. That's what Britt wanted. That's what Britt got. So we got those two. Going in, I thought that Britt should have won this. There was kind of almost a Japanese wrestling mentality in my head, whereby I felt, why not just do it where Britt gets the win, and then Saraya can sort of work her way up, build herself up to being in a position to, in essence, challenge Britt again, be that for a title or not, that doesn't matter, but kind of working her way up to earning the right to face Britt again, and then that's when she could have got the big win. But that said, it was still really damn cool to see Saraya back. You could tell the genuine emotion was just all over the place, and it is genuinely wonderful to see her back in a pro wrestling ring after everything that's happened. So that was really, really cool to see. Next up, three-way house fight, as we had ROH TV champion, though not defending that championship, Samoa Joe defeating Powerhouse Hobbs and Wardlow to win the TNT title. I was not expecting Joe to walk out with both belts, but in some ways, it actually makes complete sense. Partly because it's like, well, he's already TV champion of one promotion, let him be the TV champion of another. It kind of makes sense. And then there's also one less title to have to randomly think about for a while as well. In essence, sort of unifying them, but not. But being the double champion. The way it came down, if memory serves, is Wardlow was hitting a few power bombs on Hobbs. He was looking for a third, but then Joe clocked him with the TNT title, and then Joe then got the Coquina clutch on Hobbs, ultimately leading to Joe winning because Hobbs passed out. He did not tap out, that should be noted. Hobbs passed out. And Joe walking out with both belts. It was a logical way to take the belt off Wardlow without actually beating him, as it were. Kind of like how Joe originally lost the X Division title back in TNA, if you remember those days, circa 2005, I think? 2005, 2006? Yeah, that sounds about right. Kind of similar to that. But this was great fun. Kind of everything you wanted and more. Wardlow somehow tried to do like a Jeff Hardy style whisper in the wind and almost dove past both men. It was quite impressive. He just flew. It was mental. But like I say, good fun. This then led to the segment that I mentioned where Jericho spoke about Ishii, but this also set up an All-Atlantic Championship match between Jake I Like This Hat Hager and Orange Cassidy. It was the most simplest, laziest way to set up a title match. Hey, you like my belt? Hager says, yeah, about as much as I like this hat. And Cassidy says, alright, let's fight Wednesday. Sure. And that's the setup. Sometimes that's all you need, folks. You just need really, really simple pro wrestling like that. It's really, really dumb fun, but it's great. Then, it was kind of thinking back on my experience of watching it. It was at about this point in the show, I feel, where I started to flag a little bit. I can't remember off the top of my head how far the show was in now. If you include 0 Hour, we were probably at least at around the 3 hour mark, I'm guessing. I don't remember the exact timing. But this is where I started flagging. I think what I ended up doing is actually just watching the next hour of the show standing up in a bid to try and just keep awake because I really was starting to flag. But Darby Allin and Sting defeating Jay Lethal and Jeff Jarrett. Also with Sonjay and Satnam Singh at ringside. Satnam Singh arguably gets MVP in this match for just catching Darby Allin, who fell legitimately from like 25 feet in the air from the top of a ladder on the stage and just caught him like it was nothing. And then also had to catch Sting as well, though I think the speed of Sting probably made him lose balance a little bit. But this was just good fun. The finish ultimately came, if memory serves. Darby Allin was going to hit a coffin drop on Jay Lethal, I think it was, but then Jarrett came in, clocked Darby Allin as he was flying in the air with a guitar, and then this ultimately led to Lethal getting pinned. I think he tried to do the Lethal combination. Yeah, so Lethal tried to hit the Lethal combination, but instead fell into a death drop in mid-air, and then Allin, fell into the Sting Scorpion death drop in mid-air, then leading to Darby Allin getting the coffin drop on Jay Lethal to get the win. this was really, really good fun, and the string of this tag team being undefeated continues, let alone this streak of Sting's matches on pay-per-view are always such damn good fun continues. This is great. I'm just enjoying it. It's good fun. Then, pardon me a sec, I take a quick drink. Then, we got to what I said earlier was one of my contenders for match of the night. Jamie Hayter versus Toni Storm. I should be more accurate, defeating Toni Storm to become the AEW Interim Women's World Champion. It was excellent that Hayter won. The crowd was so into her. There were various moments during this match when it felt like Toni Storm was going to retain. There were just little things like how there was interference from Rebel and some interference from Britt. And there was one definitive moment when you could tell the crowd just went, oh, Tony's going to retain, isn't she? You could just feel it. And then Hayter kicked out of the pile driver, her strong zero, I think it was. Or storm zero, excuse me. And then at that moment, the crowd didn't know what the heck was going to happen. It was such good fun. Ultimately, what occurred, if memory serves, was the referee was distracted by Rebel. During that time, Britt Baker was going to try and take the turnbuckle cover off of the turnbuckle, but I think Britt got knocked off the apron. It may have been because Hayter and or Storm were thrown into her, but ultimately, this led to Toni Storm being thrown into the exposed buckle, and then allowing Jamie Hayter to hit her ripcord lariat to pin and get the title. The reaction of the crowd was phenomenal. I'm so happy Jamie Hayter is champion. In terms of how the interim women's world title situation is sorted, I've got various thoughts on that. I might do another stream or a video at some point just to try and give my thoughts on how to rectify that, because it's getting to a point now where, in the context of AEW championships, it's a big outlier, this. So they do need to rectify this issue sooner or later, or at least have clarity as to how it's going to be handled, because there is even inconsistencies on AEW's website surrounding that. But I'm so happy for Jamie Hayter being champion, and I can't wait to see what matches we're going to get next, because Hayter's ability is like Toni Storm, who is equally as good of a wrestler. There's just something about Jamie Hayter where I think her personality can translate to a whole different degree being champion, and one would assume long term this is going to lead to the eventual breakup between her and Britt, and ultimately a feud over the title, which will be so damn good. Then we come to our semi-main event, if memory serves, that being the Acclaimed defending successfully the AEW Tag Team titles against Swerve in Our Glory. The big crux of this was Anthony Bowens was having a shoulder injury which was being worked on. I'm not sure if that's just in storyline or if that's legit. I've seen numerous reports going either or. But what this was ultimately playing into was Swerve wanting to cheat to win. And the big question mark going into this, and even what I said going in on this, was there are two variables. Was Keith Lee going to turn to the dark side, or was he basically just going to tell Swerve to sod off and then go away and leave him hanging for himself and whatnot? Fending for himself, that's the word. Ultimately, it was the latter, because Swerve tried to cheat, and Keith Lee, I think it was with a pair of pliers that he found at ringside, Swerve did, and he gave them to Keith Lee, and Keith just basically threw him down and went, no, sod off, and just walked out on him, allowing the Acclaimed ultimately to get the victory. Now, I also really liked this, because earlier in the night, we had a similar circumstance in the Trios title match, whereby Phoenix unintentionally, without realising, turned to the dark side, in essence, and are we going to get like Dark Phoenix type thing? So I really like the fact that that was a dichotomy to how this ended. And also now, this is probably going to set up Swerve and Keith Lee having a feud with each other, which is going to be great fun. As for what happens with the Acclaimed next, part of me thinks... Excuse me, I'll take a quick drink. Part of me thinks this is the time to start striking the iron with FTR becoming quadruple champions. I think this needs to happen. Especially as I think they're scheduled to defend the AAA titles before the end of the year, and then they're also seemingly going to be defending the belts around Wrestle Kingdom time for New Japan, the IWGP belts that is. So if there's ever a time to try and have the quadruple champions, I think they've got to do it sooner than later. Should the Acclaim lose the belts, though, I'm kind of almost wondering at this point, do they need the belts because they're that popular? But I guess you could say the same for FTR at this point, but they're hardly on TV. Either way, I think we should start striking the iron when it comes to making them the quadruple champions, FTR. So I'm going to go with that being the next feud. That said, there are other tag teams lurking about. I mean, I know the Young Bucks are going to be involved in the Trios title picture for a while. Maybe they go back to the tag titles for a little bit. There are other tag teams I'm sure they could bring up to be at that level to challenge for the belts again and such. House of Black are like an entity now because they're teasing their return. There's lots of directions they could go in on this. And this all leads to the World Championship match. MJF defeating Jon Moxley. Now, at this point, admittedly, I was struggling to stay awake, but I was very awake to want to know what was going to happen, if that makes sense. And you could kind of feel the crowd were a little bit burnt out as well, but they were cheering for MJF, and that meant we basically got full-blown heel Moxley. He was flipping off people, he was having a whale of a time. But what was ultimately going to happen? The variables were going to be, will the firm get involved? If they do, who will they attack? Or they kind of, in a way, teased would Regal do anything, because on the stare down that they had on Dynamite, Regal was notably just standing in the middle of both Mox and MJF. This led to the moment where MJF had the diamond ring. He pulled it out, he put it on his hand, he was gonna clock Moxley with it, but then Regal came down and basically just said, "Don't you dare use that. You said you wouldn't. Don't you dare. Prove yourself," in essence. And then at that point, the referee was down, and Regal told Moxley, "Go and wake up the ref." And as Moxley had his back turned, Regal slipped in the brass knuckles to MJF. You could tell the camera angle and the execution of this was perfect, and you could tell that the big screens they had in the arena as well, everybody saw this happen, so there was no doubting what the heck had just happened. This leads to MJF clocking Moxley in the face, and ultimately becoming the AEW champion. And the show goes off the air with MJF the new champion, and in many ways, AEW now successfully cementing where they are at and the fresh coat of paint and a fresh start they really, really needed. Because post All Out, there's just been this cloud hanging over things. Whether intentional or not, there have been some phenomenal episodes of television and some phenomenal wrestling, but there has just been this lingering cloud of what the heck is going to happen, and things just don't feel totally right. And it's even like Dynamite last week. I thought the presentation of that episode of Dynamite as a go-home show was actually very, very strong, but I just don't think everything landed the way it should have done. There was just something about that show where different elements they presented on paper and in some ways in execution were really good, but it just didn't land well with me. And going into this pay-per-view, I actually was less excited about it than I was before watching that episode of Dynamite. And that really annoyed me, but I got myself jazzed up for it again. I actually then ended up previewing the card and putting a video on YouTube, like I mentioned. And that actually got me really excited for it again, just kind of realizing what we're going to see and taking a moment to take stock and just fully appreciate it. So that was really, really cool. And this show, like I say, was an incredible show from start to finish. Were there some downward points? Yeah, but how do you beat having the one... If you count the 0 Hour show, the almost the 3-punch streak of Kingston and Akiyama, the cage match, and the Young Bucks and the Elite, via the Death Triangle. How do you compete with that as like 3 matches in a row on this show? It was almost like a poison chalice as to who goes where in some ways, but this was an excellent show. Coming out of it, to be blunt, there's been no drama from what I've seen. The only drama that I've seen doing the rounds, which I'm guessing is probably just a storyline thing, is seemingly Colton Gunn, like, quote tweeting Jungle Boy and proclaiming something in that. So that's kind of, if that's legit, that's the only drama that's come out of it. This was an excellent, excellent show. I'm so happy. Everything feels right with AEW. Is everything going to be back to the way it was? No. There is a big element that is probably never going to come back, and it'll just be that thing that happened for a year, and it will probably never be acknowledged again. But this was a phenomenal show. a great step in the right direction. And in terms of what's next, so much is coming out of this. And we've got the Winter is Coming episode of Dynamite happening within the next month, I think it is. It's very, very soon. And that's normally a very newsworthy show. So we will see how things progress on that. But an excellent episode, an excellent pay-per-view that AEW have presented in Full Gear 2022. And on to Dynamite this coming Wednesday. Thank you very much for watching this AEW Full Gear 2022 review. I hope you enjoyed it. Stick around because I'll be right back with New Japan, Stardom's historic crossover event and talking about that. Be right back, folks.